Welcome to the NBAV podcast. Welcome back to NBAV, the NBA Avenue podcast, where we're going to start off. We're a couple of days away still, considering that today is only a Tuesday afternoon and the games of the NBA Finals don't actually start until Thursday. We're still stuck in limbo for a little while, and just to start off, and before we get to the NBA Final, let's just talk a little bit about the WNBA controversy. Now, I'm not a WNBA fan. I haven't watched WNBA basketball during my life. I think that's pretty understandable. I'm sure most of us, if not all of us, everyone listening to this has probably watched very, very little of women's basketball. Maybe you caught glimpses of a couple of exciting tournament games, maybe. But for the most part, we're really fans of the NBA. And to a much lesser extent, the WNBA. Not to say that if some sort of incredible thing happened in that league that we wouldn't shift our focus, if something headline-worthy grabbed our attention, if there was a great rivalry or great matchups or something intriguing that we wouldn't turn over. But for now, it's definitely a very, very, very distant backseat, almost non-existent, I would even say, to most of us. But the controversy that is here right now, at least to somebody who hasn't been paying the most attention to the situation, at least not to the league at large, and suddenly you come in and it seems like there's a transcendent talent who's entered their league. Everyone knows this is talking about Caitlin Clark. She is a woman who has looked sort of Steph Curry-esque in the way that she's able to shoot the basketball. It doesn't seem like anybody is able to rival the way she shoots. Granted, she's still a rookie, and she isn't necessarily going out there doing that on a nightly basis in her rookie season thus far, but it seems like, based off of her college success, that she is potentially going to be the greatest WNBA player that we've ever seen. Now, coming into the league, she enters, and she isn't exactly met with the most positivity from players around the league, because there are a lot more eyeballs on the sport. Everybody's tuning in to watch this amazing woman basketball player, and the other players are kind of taking offense to it. They're not accepting her with open arms, which is okay. That's sort of in some way to be expected. That's not something that we haven't seen, right? Look back in the NBA, and you have tens of and hundreds of examples of rookies. First of all, rookies in general, if you go all the way back, I'm sure it used to be way, way, way worse in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and then today it's probably not nearly as bad as it used to be, but there's a concept of a rookie and there's a concept of a vet. And the vets often haze the rookies in certain ways. Hopefully it's not ways that are horribly dangerous, but there is some sort of adjustment process, right? If anyone who watched the Lakers series, the television show on HBO, knows that there were certain things that Magic Johnson was expected to do for the captain while he was a rookie, and it looked like the way at least they portrayed it in the television series was that he would have to bring Kareem his orange juice and his newspaper. Now, not to say that that was exactly how it actually went down, but something along the lines of that. There were things that rookies were responsible for. Maybe a rookie doesn't get as good of a locker. Maybe a rookie has to carry bags at some point. Who knows? I don't know how much of that still pertains in actual today's league. But then also on the court, there have been many stories of Larry Bird telling people, hey, you're a rookie. You don't get to even have an opinion. I didn't ask for your opinion. And mostly there's a concept of you have to earn your stripes from the start before you really get considered to be something. Now, I'm totally on board with that. I think most of us are on board with that. There's a certain process, right? You don't show up on day one working in an office job and take over as the CEO of the company or act like you're entitled. That's not really going to go over too well. Now, for her to step into the league, and what's basically happening is they're roughing her up, which is okay. You can rough her up. But what happened most recently is someone took a cheap shot at her. It wasn't the most vicious shot of all time. It wasn't exactly Bill Laimbeer, but it was a little shot, knocked her off balance, and it seems like the aftermath of that is you have a couple of women saying that, hey, the eyeballs are not coming into our sport because of her. It's because of all of us, and it seems like they're saying that it seems like, at least to me, from an outside perspective looking in, that there's a lot of jealousy going on here. And I don't know if it's jealousy, black and white stuff. I don't know if it's jealousy of, hey, everybody, all anyone wants to talk about now is this one woman, but hey, we've had a league here that's been operating for a while. But it definitely seems like there's a lot of jealousy involved here, where you could just make it simple and say, hey, she's a rookie, and sometimes rookies have to get shown their place in the league before they become veterans in this league. And yeah, we're trying to throw her off her game. We're trying to take her out of the game, and not by absolutely leveling her in a dangerous way, waiting till she goes airborne and undercutting her, and not that sort of thing. But yeah, we were playing a little rough, and I got carried away. That would sort of be the way I would expect a real professional to go about it, is if you are in the wrong. And there's been many, many players over the years who have done technical fouls. I mean, I remember a point where Vince Carter reached between someone's legs and got ejected from the game for some sort of flagrant technical foul. And it was a pretty egregious play when you watched it, and it's really not at all like the character of Vince Carter. But look, people in the heat of a game sometimes make a movement that they regret, and that's okay. But you come out afterwards and you say, yeah, I shouldn't have done that, right? You've had examples of players doing many things wrong, getting called for many types of technicals. And if you're being a professional afterwards, what you should do is you should go to the press conference and say, yeah, that's on me. I shouldn't have done that. I should have been a little bit more careful. But ultimately, I was trying to play a physical brand of basketball. And that would be fine if that would be the way they're going about it. But they're sort of making it into this thing which is sort of turning into, somewhat of a race war. It's turning into a very strange look where you have this white woman coming into the WNBA who, in many people's minds, is better than everybody else in the league. And it seems like there's a lot of jealousy coming from veterans of the league and also coming from other young players in the league who are saying, hey, this is a league that's existed for a long time. And I will point out that this is not a league that's been supremely popular. It's well documented and chronicled that they haven't made any money as a league up to this point. They produce a loss almost every season, if not every season. I believe they've never actually made money. So what they really need are more eyeballs, and they should be happy wherever that comes in. On the men's side of things, when Larry Bird came in and Magic Johnson came in, ultimately that was a phenomenal thing. They elevated the sport so much. And then, of course, when you have Michael Jordan enter the league, it was pretty obvious, maybe not from the draft, because he wasn't the first overall pick, right? He was the third overall pick. So it wasn't super, super obvious. But in this case, you have what I would say from an NBA standpoint, you would have to say is comparable to LeBron James, where you have a transcendent talent, gets drafted number one overall. Any team that would have been in the number one position would have drafted LeBron. And yet really the same thing here. Any team that had the number one overall pick, it was a no-brainer. It was a Wembanyama in terms of, it's obvious this player is going number one overall. Doesn't matter who has the pick, doesn't matter fit, doesn't matter anything. This talent cannot be passed up on, and she's going to be taken with the number one overall pick. And then she comes into the league, and everyone's very motivated to just not allow her to operate, but it seems like it's really beyond that. It seems like there's a great factor of jealousy here, and the WNBA should really, really try and just use this as the wave and ride the wave and try to get more onto people's radar through her, and that would kind of be the way to do this, right? It would be like you get Michael Jordan, and now suddenly everyone's tuning in and they want to be like Mike. Mike was everywhere. He was in every commercial. He was the most famous person probably on the planet at the time. Anyone who watched The Last Dance will get a very good taste of that. Or if you were from that era, then you certainly know about it. And you can educate the young kids today about just how famous Michael Jordan was. I mean, just how famous Michael Jordan still is. He's probably made more money off his shoes than he's made in his NBA career. I think that's a pretty well-known fact. So you should try and take it for what it is. Great players are always going to come into the league. As time goes on, the players, the caliber of players are just going to keep improving. And every time a new transcendent talent enters the league, you can't just make it this jealousy business of, hey, we were here first, you don't belong here kind of thing. It just comes off as really petty and really unprofessional and kind of sad. Would be the way that I see it. It's just sad. It's like, why can't they just try to compete? And why can't they just? You can talk trash. I have no problem with it. You can get rough, but it's the jealousy. The jealousy factor is what really kind of gives it a bad look, in my opinion. But let's get over to what we really want to talk about, which is the NBA. And we have one of the tougher NBA finals to predict, with the Dallas Mavericks taking on the juggernaut of the NBA and the Boston Celtics. Now, why is it so tough? We've really talked about it for the entire season. From day one until now, Boston's been a juggernaut. They've been unstoppable. They win 80% of their games, and in the playoffs, it was the same deal. Now, they haven't faced anyone tough in the playoffs, which is kind of what makes this a little bit tougher to predict, because we haven't seen them go against a really good team. Now, on the flip side, we've seen Dallas have to fight through a couple of tough series, right? They were building themselves up still by beating the Clippers. They beat the Oklahoma City Thunder, who swept the first round series against the Pelicans. Then they beat the Oklahoma City Thunder 4-2, and then they ended up beating the Minnesota Timberwolves 4-1, straight on the heels of Minnesota upsetting the Denver Nuggets, the previous NBA champs, the defending champs. So Dallas has certainly been forged through fire, and Boston has kind of just been this juggernaut team that hasn't really seen a real true competitor, right? It would have been if Boston would have got to face a healthy Milwaukee team that could have potentially pushed them to play on another level than they needed for the entire duration of the playoffs. If they would have had to play a healthy Knicks team, that could have been a team that could have at least pushed them a little bit. Had they faced a healthy Philadelphia 76er team with Embiid and with Maxey in round one, perhaps, that would have been something which could have pushed them to a little bit closer to their limit. But the way that things went against a injured Miami team, the way things went against an injured Indiana team, the way things went in the middle round against an injured Cleveland Cavaliers team, we never really got to see that. Sure, Boston lost one game in each of those first two series, but ultimately they won 4-1, 4-1, and 4-0. Very, very little in terms of opposition. So that makes it tough, because Boston has just been in a league of their own in the Eastern Conference. And in the Western Conference, you have Dallas, where Dallas got hot at around the trade deadline. Dallas got hot after the All-Star break. They've been pretty consistent. They've played on that level. They've played on that pace with Boston since that point. They faced tougher opposition, and they performed almost as well, winning their series 4-2, 4-2, and 4-1. Ultimately, it only took them 2 games longer to get to this point than it did Boston, right? Boston lost 2 games. And Dallas lost 5 games. Okay, so Boston only lost 2 games. Dallas lost 5 games total. So really not too much of a difference separating Boston and Dallas in terms of the amount of games that it took them to get to the finals, even though Dallas took a much tougher road. And you have to factor in another point, which is who's the best player. The best player is Luka Doncic, who can potentially play as the best sidekick, Kyrie Irving. Not to mention, Dallas has a lot of different ways that they can go in the series, right? If you talk about all of the different players that Dallas has on the bench, sometimes they can choose to go with using a little bit more of the defensive presence. They could use little Dante Exum. They can use Kleba in some games. When Kleba was out with a little bit of injury, they were able to go in a different direction. They have Green, who can give them minutes. They have Hardy, who suddenly emerged and gave them minutes. We haven't really seen them use Tim Hardaway Jr. very much. So they have just so many different ways that they can go. If things don't go well for them in the first 2 games, they can really shift things up. They can experiment with different lineups. There's a lot of different ways, and drastically different ways, that they can go. They can throw in Hardaway in a game 3 down 0-2, and he can catch fire and maybe bring them back into the series. You can go fully defensive. You can use P.J. Washington, Derek Jones Jr., Gafford, Lively, and then add Exum into that. You can experiment with the playmaking of Hardy, and if he's able to do what he did in the Western Conference Finals and take that to the NBA Finals, that's another very interesting wrinkle. So there's a lot of different adjustments the Mavericks can make offensively and defensively, and Boston's going to have to defend against that. Ultimately, who is the better team? Boston does. Boston has the better roster, but it feels to me like this is a case of going with your head or going with your heart. My heart says that Dallas is going to win this. Dallas, it feels like their time. Now, I'm not just being one of those guys who says, it's our time, and that's the whole basis of my opinion on why they're going to win the finals. But Dallas feels like they caught lightning in a bottle. They've been extremely consistent ever since they made these trades and brought these guys on. I was a big supporter of these trades. From day one of the trades, I said, these are phenomenal moves, and these are going to make them a contender, these moves, for the NBA Finals. And when the playoffs came around and it was time to make your playoff predictions, I predicted that Dallas would go all the way to the NBA Finals before the playoffs even started. So I've been right on them from the moment they got Washington and from the moment they got Gafford. I thought that the athleticism that those two guys give them and adding it into the core structure that they already had, considering that Kyrie hadn't played a lot of games in the season up till that point. He probably missed like 20 games, and you had Doncic, who's able to take you to a level that no one could really imagine ever possible. Adding in all those factors, bringing two more guys who are super athletic onto the table makes a huge difference. And then when you factor in that they've done even better than we possibly could have thought, it's really not that hard to imagine how they got to the NBA Finals. So you factor all that in, and you have flashbacks of when Kyrie hits that left-handed buzzer beater at the foul line, and the camera shot of Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic, arm over arm, shoulder over shoulder, going to war, feeling like brothers. It just feels like everything's caught momentum at the right time. Their series started off a little bit tougher against the Clippers. The Clippers weren't even playing with Kawhi Leonard in all those games. Still, it took 4-2. It took 6 games to beat the Clippers. Then they went against a better team in Oklahoma City Thunder, and they stole some of those games. They stole one of them. They perhaps gave back one of them later on in the series, but they handled Oklahoma City pretty well, and Oklahoma City was a very, very good team, very good young team. And then they improved their performance even more in the Western Conference Finals. They're getting stronger as time goes on. Versus where Boston is. Boston can win it any year. They could have beat Golden State. That was a close series. It ended up going 6 games, I believe. There was a point in that series where a couple of baskets would have shifted everything. Jaylen Brown nearly took them to the promised land. It was very close. Tatum struggled a little bit, and I don't know if he's going to struggle again this time around, but Boston could win it this year. They could win it next year. They could win it the year after. They're probably going to win it at some point. No one's going to be able to keep them out of the end zone on, for the next 4 consecutive downs. Let's call this first down, or whatever you want to call a couple of years ago was. This is the best team that they've had in a very long time. Perhaps since the days of Larry. Perhaps since the Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, Ray Allen, Rajon Rondo team. It's probably the best team since then, at least. You have Tatum and Brown, dynamic duo, Porzingis, Derek Jones. Sorry, not Derek Jones, Derek White, Drew Holiday. You have some good players coming off the bench there as well. You have Al Horford coming in as a bench player where, frankly, that's probably the role that really he should be in at this point in his career, and not as a guy who has to play 35 minutes a night like he had to do in last playoffs. They're really strong. And Boston, on paper, is probably the better team. But when you factor in your head versus your heart, it feels like Dallas has everything going right for them at the right time, and they're only getting stronger. And ultimately, I am going to side with Luka Doncic. I'm going to side with Luka. I'm going to side with Kyrie. I'm going to side with Jason Kidd. I'm going to side with the team that has taken off like a rocket ship mid-season, and not the team that's been there the entire season. I'm going to go with the team that's been tested, and I'm not going to go with the team that's had the easy road. Ultimately, I'm going to go with Luka. I'm going to go with the Dallas Mavericks to win the entire thing, and I'm not necessarily going to pick them again next season. I don't know if they have the DNA to go back-to-back. I don't know if Luka has that motivation, that Michael Jordan, insane, maniacal way about him. But for one season, I think he's going to get it done, and that's going to be where I will stamp my prediction. It's going to be on the Dallas Mavericks to win the NBA Finals, and that is how I see it happening. You can follow the podcast at NBAV, that's NBA Avenue, on Twitter, X as well. Email the show at nbavenue@yahoo.com. As always, we're your source for a great time every time, and until next time, we are out.